The sound of sirens pierced through the cold night like a grim warning. Thomas, a seasoned and respected police officer, gripped the radio tightly in his patrol car while his partner, Mike, reviewed the details of the impending operation. The intel was clear. A dangerous group was cornered in a warehouse on the outskirts of town. Thomas knew this wouldn't be an easy mission, but he never hesitated when duty called. "They're heavily armed, Tom. We can't underestimate them," Mike said, adjusting his ballistic vest, his voice laden with concern. "I know, Mike, but we have a mission to accomplish." "Think of the families we're protecting," Thomas replied, his tone calm yet resolute. In Thomas's mind, a comforting image emerged, the smile of his 13-year-old son, Ethan. The boy often said he wanted to grow up to be like his father, wearing the uniform with pride. Thomas felt a pang in his chest. Tonight, more than ever, he wanted to go home and hug his son, as he did every night after work. When they arrived at the scene, the tension was palpable. Patrol cars were lined up, officers were in formation, and the flashing lights of the sirens painted a surreal atmosphere. The commander reviewed the strategies, and as usual, Thomas took the lead. "We'll go in from the side. We need to neutralize the threat quickly, but without unnecessary risks," he instructed, adjusting his weapon while double-checking the plan with the team. Inside the warehouse, the sound of raised voices and hurried footsteps echoed. The criminals were clearly desperate, which made the situation even more dangerous. Thomas's team moved cautiously, splitting up to cover more ground. When they finally made contact, everything happened too quickly. "Police, drop your weapons now." Thomas's voice boomed, commanding authority. The first gunshot shattered the tense silence like thunder. What followed was a chaotic exchange of fire, the sound of bullets ricocheting off metal walls reverberating through the space. Acting on instinct and training, Thomas shielded a team member who had been caught in the open, putting himself in a vulnerable position. That's when it happened. A single, precise shot pierced through the air and struck him in the chest, bypassing the protective vest. He fell as his colleagues swiftly neutralized the threat.
"Tom."
"No," Mike shouted, rushing to his friend's side and cradling him in his arms. Thomas's vision began to blur, but a faint smile formed on his lips. "Take care of Ethan, Mike. Tell him his dad saw it through to the end," he whispered, his voice filled with emotion. Reinforcements arrived, but it was too late. Thomas, the man who always put others' lives above his own, was gone. The news was a devastating blow. The next day, a patrol car pulled up in front of Thomas's house. Mike stepped out, his expression heavy, and walked to the door where Emily, Thomas's wife, stood with Ethan by her side. "What happened, Mike? Where's Thomas?" Emily's voice trembled with anxiety, her face beginning to crumble with fear. Mike took a deep breath, his hands shaking. He knelt before Ethan, taking the boy's hands in his own. "Ethan, your dad was a hero. He saved lives. But he's not coming home," Mike said, his voice breaking. Ethan didn't respond. His gaze was hollow, and the understanding came in a painful silence. He ran to his room, while Emily collapsed in tears in Mike's arms. Grief consumed their home, but something began to take root in Ethan's heart, the resolve to carry on his father's legacy. Ethan was 13 when the void left by Thomas's death became most apparent. He was no longer the little boy who silently cried in his room, clinging to memories of his dad. Now he was beginning to understand the world differently, and with that, the weight of his father's absence grew with him. One day at school, his history teacher assigned an essay on the students' greatest heroes. While others enthusiastically discussed athletes, celebrities, or historical figures, Ethan remained quiet. He knew exactly who his hero was, but putting it into words felt overwhelming. That night, sitting at his desk, he pulled out his father's notebook, which he kept safe like a treasure. As he flipped through the pages, he found a passage he had read countless times, but which always felt fresh. Being a police officer isn't just a job, it's a calling. It's about protecting what matters, even if it means sacrificing what you love. My greatest wish is that Ethan grows up knowing that love and duty go hand in hand, The words echoed in Ethan's mind. He closed the notebook and began to write. When he finished, he tucked the essay into his backpack, feeling that he had finally expressed something that had been with him since childhood, his determination to honor his father's memory. Years later, the big day arrived, high school graduation. For Ethan, it was more than just an academic milestone. It was proof that he had persevered, even while carrying the weight of loss. The auditorium was packed. Emily sat in the front row, her eyes shining with pride. Beside her, Mike kept his gaze fixed on the stage. He and other officers had planned something special for Ethan, something he would never forget. "Ethan Parker," the announcer called. The applause began, but instead of bringing Ethan to the stage, the MC raised her hand for silence. "Before we call Ethan up, I'd like to say a few words. Everyone here knows the story of Thomas Parker, a police officer who gave his life for the community. But today, we're not just talking about Thomas. Today, we're here to celebrate Ethan Parker, a young man who, despite his pain and challenges, chose to keep going." Ethan felt a lump in his throat as she continued. "Ethan, you're an example of strength, dedication, and resilience. Your father would be so proud of you." She paused, then smiled warmly at him. "But before you come up, please turn around." Confused, Ethan turned to see a sight that left him speechless. Mike and several uniformed officers had entered the auditorium and were walking toward him. They formed a circle around him. "Ethan, we're here today to represent your father," Mike said, his voice thick with emotion. "And to show you that you were never alone." The officers began reciting in unison. Strength isn't just about carrying the weight of responsibility. It's about moving forward even when the path seems impossible. Today, Ethan Parker, you inspire us, just as your father inspired us. Ethan broke down in tears. Emily, sitting in the audience, couldn't hold back her own, nor could many others in the room. Mike placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Come on, kid. It's time to get your diploma." The officers accompanied Ethan to the stage, where he received his diploma amid a standing ovation. Overcome with emotion, he looked out at the audience and said, "Thank you, everyone. Thank you for showing me that my father's legacy lives on. I promise to honor it in everything I do." That night was more than just a graduation ceremony. It was a turning point in Ethan's life, reaffirming his determination to follow in his father's footsteps and keep his memory alive. "I won't give up until I get it right," the boy said, clutching the ball tightly. Ethan saw himself in that kid. He picked up the ball and spent a few minutes teaching the boy how to adjust his kicks. When the ball finally found the back of the net, the smile on the boy's face made Ethan realize something important. Small actions can have a huge impact on someone's life. That day, Ethan went home with a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't just about following in his father's footsteps anymore. It was about finding his own way to serve and protect others. Finally, the day of the police academy entrance exams arrived. Ethan was anxious but confident. He had spent months preparing, and now it was time to put everything to the test. The academy was buzzing with activity, filled with candidates completing forms, undergoing physical evaluations, and sitting through rigorous interviews. During the physical assessment, Ethan pushed himself to the limit, running harder than ever, scaling obstacles with agility and demonstrating the strength and endurance he had built over time. In moments of rest, he observed the other candidates, many of whom looked just as determined as he was. At the end of the day, Ethan was called in for an interview with a senior officer. The man, serious and sharp-eyed, studied Ethan for a few moments before speaking. "Ethan Parker, I remember your father. He was an extraordinary man." "Thank you, sir. I hope to follow in his footsteps," Ethan replied respectfully. "You know this won't be easy, right?" the officer asked. "Yes, sir. But I'm ready for the challenges," Ethan said, his voice steady. The officer studied him a moment longer before a faint smile appeared. "I see potential in you, Parker. Welcome to the next phase." Ethan left the room with a modest smile, his heart pounding. He knew this was just the first step, but he also knew he was one step closer to his goal. That evening, back home, Ethan sat down with Emily to share how the day had gone. Dad always said courage wasn't about not being afraid, but about facing your fears, Ethan said, glancing at his father's photo on the wall. I think I finally understand what he meant. Emily smiled, her eyes glistening with tears.
He would be so proud of you, Ethan.
And so am I. Ethan ran his fingers over the badge he always carried and closed his eyes for a moment. He knew the road ahead would be long, but he was ready to face whatever came his way. Entering the police academy marked a turning point for Ethan. He knew the journey would be demanding, but it was exactly where he wanted to be. From day one, the instructors made it clear they weren't just training officers, they were shaping individuals capable of handling anything. The program was intense and heavily focused on teamwork. Ethan quickly bonded with two recruits in particular. Caleb, an optimistic young man who brought a lightheartedness to tough situations, and Sarah, a calm and calculated sharpshooter with remarkable precision. Together, they formed a close-knit support group. Whenever one of them struggled, the others stepped in to help. Come on, Parker, just 2 more kilometers. Caleb shouted during a grueling run, pushing Ethan to keep going even when he felt like he couldn't. And next time, make sure your cover positions are solid, Sarah advised after a tactical simulation, her tone firm but encouraging. Ethan learned a lot from them, and together, they developed a strong dynamic. The group became known throughout the academy as one of the most cohesive teams. The turning point came during a live simulation. The exercise required recruits to clear a building taken over by a fictitious group of criminals, coordinating entry, cover, and the rescue of hostages. Ethan was assigned as the team leader. Listen up, this isn't just another drill, Sergeant Miller said, scanning the recruits with a steely gaze. I want to see communication, strategy, and most importantly, teamwork. If you fail here, you've learned nothing. Ethan felt the weight of responsibility as he briefed Caleb and Sarah. Okay, Sarah, you take the side entrance. Caleb, you're on the rear while I lead the front team. Any sign of movement, report immediately. Got it, leader, Caleb replied with a confident grin. The simulation began with palpable tension. Ethan's team advanced cautiously, communicating through hand signals. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until Ethan made a critical mistake. He failed to check the corners of a room, allowing a perpetrator to slip by and injure one of the team members.
Parker.
Hostage secured, but we lost a team member. Sarah's voice crackled through the radio. Ethan felt the weight of his error immediately. Despite this, he kept his composure and completed the mission, but he knew his oversight would be harshly criticized. When the exercise ended, Sergeant Miller gathered the recruits in the yard for debriefing. What happened in there, Parker? Miller asked, his tone sharp, his eyes fixed on Ethan. Sir, I failed to properly clear the corners before advancing, Ethan admitted without hesitation, taking full responsibility.
Exactly.
A mistake like that in the real world could cost lives, Miller said, addressing the entire group before turning back to Ethan. You didn't fail alone. The whole team relied on you, and you let them down. The sergeant's words were tough, but Ethan knew he was right. However, Miller's tone shifted slightly as he finished. Parker, come to my office later. I want to talk to you. Ethan went straight to Miller's office after the session. Inside, the sergeant was reviewing notes at his desk. Close the door and sit down, Miller said, not looking up. Ethan complied, sitting upright and attentive. Parker, you made a mistake today. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Mistakes cost lives. But do you know why I made you the team leader? Ethan hesitated.
No, sir.
Miller stood, crossing his arms. Because you have potential. More than that, you have something not everyone does, the ability to grow. Your father was an excellent officer, Parker. But I want you to be better. Not because he fell short, but because I see in you the same thing he had, the capacity to learn. Ethan felt the weight of Miller's words, but also their significance. He hadn't expected easy praise, and knowing Miller believed in him even after a mistake filled him with renewed determination.
Thank you, sir.
I promise I won't let you down. Miller gestured toward the door with a faint smile. Promise yourself first, Parker. Now get back to training. In the following weeks, Ethan, Caleb, and Sarah worked harder than ever. Each simulation became an opportunity to correct mistakes and improve, and Ethan began to display a natural leadership ability he hadn't realized he possessed. Finally, graduation day arrived. The ceremony was formal, yet filled with emotion. Ethan felt a mix of nerves and pride as he donned the uniform for the first time, adjusting every detail with care. When his name was called, he walked to the stage with his head held high, aware of Emily and Mike watching from the audience. Sergeant Miller handed Ethan his badge with a slight smile. "Parker, you've shown you have what it takes. Now show the world." Ethan accepted the badge with pride. Looking out at the crowd, he met the eyes of his mother and Mike. In their expressions, he saw the same certainty he now carried within himself. He was ready for whatever lay ahead. The graduation ceremony marked the end of one chapter, but Ethan knew it was only the beginning of his real journey. As he joined the city's police department, he felt a mix of anxiety and excitement. Putting on the uniform for the first time, he realized he carried something much bigger than just responsibility. He carried a legacy. On the morning of his first day, Ethan arrived early at the station. The place was bustling with officers coming and going, reports being reviewed, and radios buzzing with constant updates. Yet everything seemed to quiet when Captain Richards, a robust man with a stern gaze, entered the room. "Parker," Richards called out loudly, his eyes scanning the new recruit. Ethan quickly stood and saluted. "Yes, sir." Richards gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "So, you're Parker Jr. I've heard a lot about your father. I hope you're up to the task." "I'll do my best, sir," Ethan replied, maintaining a respectful tone. "I expect nothing less," Richards nodded. "You'll be shadowing Officer Dawson today. He'll show you how things work around here." Officer Dawson was a middle-aged man with an easygoing smile and a relaxed demeanor. When he met Ethan, he gave him a firm, friendly handshake. "Welcome to the chaos, rookie. Ready for your baptism by fire." "Always, sir," Ethan replied with determination. "You can call me Dawson." "Sir makes me feel old," Dawson joked as they walked toward the patrol car. During their shift, Dawson explained the basics of police work while they patrolled the city. He spoke clearly, but his humor lightened the mood. "Listen, Parker, I know you want to change the world, but let me teach you rule number 1. Survive. It doesn't matter how much you want to help others if you don't take care of yourself first." Ethan nodded, understanding the seriousness behind Dawson's words. The shift started quietly with routine calls, but by mid-afternoon, the patrol car's radio crackled with an urgent alert. An armed robbery was underway at a downtown convenience store. Dawson quickly turned on the sirens and accelerated. "All right, rookie. This is going to be a test. Stay sharp and follow my lead," Dawson said as he parked in front of the store. They stepped out cautiously, approaching the building with their weapons drawn. Dawson radioed for backup, but help was minutes away. Ethan's heart pounded as he peered through the window, spotting 2 nervous-looking robbers holding guns on the store clerk. "Let's handle this without anyone getting hurt," Dawson whispered before shouting toward the store. "Police, come out with your hands up." The robbers turned in surprise. One of them started raising his hands, but the other held firm, keeping his gun trained on the clerk. "We're not going back to prison," the second robber shouted, visibly agitated. Ethan felt a knot in his stomach. He knew he had to stay calm, but every second felt like an eternity. "Easy, easy," Dawson said, his voice firm yet calm. "No one needs to get hurt here. You can walk out of this now, and we can settle this peacefully." Ethan noticed the first robber wavering, but the second was still hesitant. He decided to step in. "Listen, you have a choice," Ethan said firmly, without raising his voice. "You can walk away from this alive, or you can make things worse for everyone. Think about your families. Think about what comes next." The second robber looked at Ethan, his eyes filled with uncertainty. A heavy silence hung in the air until, finally, he lowered his weapon. Dawson acted quickly, handcuffing both men while calling for reinforcements. He glanced at Ethan with a satisfied smile. "Not bad for your first day, Parker." Back at the station, as he filled out his report, Ethan felt a mix of relief and accomplishment. He knew this was just the beginning, but there was something reassuring about staying calm under pressure. After finishing the report, he ran into Dawson in the hallway. "Good work today, rookie. And by the way, your dad would have been proud." Ethan smiled. "Thanks, Dawson." As he left the station that night, Ethan looked up at the sky and held the badge that now belonged to him. He knew the road ahead would be long and full of challenges, but he also knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. "This is just the beginning, Dad," he whispered before getting into his car and heading home. The first few weeks at the department flew by. Ethan quickly adapted to the fast-paced environment and high expectations of the job. He became known as a dedicated officer, always eager to learn. Dawson, with his experience and humor, was the perfect partner, keeping Ethan grounded without letting the weight of responsibility become overwhelming. "You know, Parker, not everyone makes it through the first month without thinking about quitting," Dawson said one morning as he adjusted the radio in the patrol car. "But you're doing well." "Thanks, Dawson," Ethan replied, trying not to sound too eager. "There's still a lot I need to improve on." "There always is. But if everyone thought like that, the world would be a better place." One rainy afternoon, a call came in. A man was armed and barricaded in a residential building, threatening his neighbors. When Ethan and Dawson arrived, the scene was chaotic. Residents stood outside, some crying, others trying to explain the situation to officers securing the perimeter. "We've got a man on the 3rd floor," the sergeant on site explained. "He's armed and in a state of crisis. He's demanding that no one enters or leaves without his permission." "Any hostages?" Dawson asked. "None that we know of. But the neighbors are terrified." Ethan felt the same chill in his stomach as he had during the robbery. Still, he maintained his composure while Dawson checked their gear and discussed strategies. "Parker, you're with me. Let's try to talk him down before things escalate," Dawson said, placing a firm hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Understood." The two climbed the stairs slowly, the muffled sound of rain outside contrasting with the growing tension. When they reached the 3rd floor hallway, they positioned themselves near the apartment door. Dawson began speaking, his voice loud yet calm. "Sir, this is the police. We're here to talk. We don't want anyone to get hurt." For a few seconds, there was silence. Then, a rough, angry voice responded. "Go away. I don't need help." Ethan watched Dawson, who signaled him to stay ready. "No one's leaving, sir. We just want to make sure you're safe." "Why don't you tell us what's going on?" Dawson insisted. From the other side of the door, the response came in the form of a gunshot that splintered the wood. Ethan and Dawson immediately ducked and retreated. "He's unstable," Dawson muttered, grabbing his radio to call for tactical reinforcements. Ethan focused on the door, noticing something, a crack in the wood revealing a shadow moving inside. He carefully leaned toward Dawson and whispered, "I think he's near the door. We might be able to calm him down before he does anything worse." Dawson nodded. "Go ahead, but be careful." Ethan stepped forward, keeping his voice steady and calm. "Listen, I know you're scared. I know everything feels out of control right now, but it doesn't have to end like this." "What do you know about fear?" The man's voice came, laden with frustration and pain. Ethan hesitated for a moment, but decided to be honest. "I know what it feels like to lose someone. I know what it feels like to think the world is against you. But I also know there's a way out. You just have to trust me." There was a long, tense pause. Ethan felt sweat trickle down his back as he waited for a response. Finally, the man spoke, his voice slightly calmer. "Trust? How am I supposed to trust anyone?" Ethan took a deep breath. "Because I'm here to help you. No one's going to hurt you. Let me come in and talk to you face to face." Dawson glanced at Ethan, a mix of surprise and concern on his face, but he stayed silent. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a thin man with deep circles under his eyes, his hand trembling as he held a gun. Ethan took another step forward, keeping his hands visible. "That's it. Now give me a chance to hear you out," Ethan said calmly. The seconds that followed felt like an eternity. The man looked at Ethan, then at the gun, and finally let it drop to the floor. Before he could change his mind, Dawson moved in and carefully restrained him. "It's all right now," Ethan told the man as he was handcuffed. At the station, after the man was taken into custody for psychological evaluation, Dawson approached Ethan with a smile. "I'm not going to lie, rookie. You've got something special. It's not every day someone handles a situation like that without panicking." Ethan shrugged, trying to downplay his pride. "I just did what felt right." Dawson shook his head. "And that's why you're going to go far." When Ethan got home that night, Emily was awake, waiting for him. "How was your day?" she asked, handing him a mug of hot tea. Ethan sighed, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the satisfaction of having made a difference. "Intense. But I think I'm starting to understand why Dad loved this job so much." Emily smiled, holding her son's hand.
He would be so proud of you, Ethan.
"And so am I." Ethan looked at the badge on the table and murmured to himself. "One day at a time, Dad." After the incident at the residential building, Ethan began to feel he was earning respect at the department. He wasn't just Parker's kid anymore. He was becoming a police officer known for his calmness under pressure and a natural ability to connect with people in difficult moments. Dawson, more than ever, became a mentor. "Listen, rookie," Dawson said during a patrol. "You've got something not everyone has. It's not just courage, it's empathy. That'll take you far, but it'll also weigh on you sometimes." "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, curious. Dawson let out a short, humorless laugh. "One day, you'll meet someone who doesn't want to be helped. And then you'll realize you can't always save the day." Ethan didn't respond immediately, reflecting on Dawson's words. He knew his partner spoke from years of experience. A few weeks later, Ethan and Dawson were assigned to a routine operation, patrolling an area known for minor crimes and de-escalating situations before they spiraled out of control. To Ethan, it seemed like just another routine assignment, but he had quickly learned that nothing on patrol was ever as simple as it seemed. As they drove through the neighborhood, Ethan spotted a young boy sitting on the curb, staring intently at the ground. He looked out of place, as if he didn't belong there. "Dawson, pull over. I think we should talk to him. He's just a kid, Parker. Probably waiting for someone. Maybe. But something tells me he needs help." Dawson sighed but pulled over, parking the car. Ethan got out, adjusted his belt, and approached the boy. "Hey, everything okay here?" he asked, keeping his tone calm. The boy glanced up quickly, but didn't answer. He looked scared, clutching a backpack tightly. "What's your name?" Ethan tried again, keeping his stance relaxed. "Danny," the boy mumbled. Ethan exchanged a glance with Dawson, who had joined him by now. "What are you doing here, Danny? You look like you don't belong." "Nothing. Just waiting," Danny replied, avoiding eye contact. Something about the boy's behavior put Ethan on alert. He noticed how Danny seemed to shield the backpack almost protectively. "What's in the bag?" Ethan asked, gesturing to the backpack. Danny hesitated, but before he could answer, a man rounded the corner briskly, his eyes locking onto the boy. Ethan immediately noticed the shift in Danny's expression. It was fear. "Dawson, heads up," Ethan murmured as the man approached. The stranger stopped a few feet away, crossing his arms. "Everything all right here, officer? That's my nephew. I've been looking for him." Danny immediately dropped his head, clutching the backpack even tighter. Ethan sensed something was wrong. He glanced at Dawson, who was already moving his hand toward his belt, ready to react. "Danny, is that true? Is this man your uncle's?" Ethan asked, leaning slightly toward the boy. I... Danny stammered but couldn't answer. "I don't think this is any of your business," the man interrupted, stepping forward. Ethan stayed calm, but his voice hardened. "If you're his relative, you won't mind if we talk to him a bit more." The man hesitated, his eyes darting between Ethan and Dawson. "I'm not going to stand here and be treated like a criminal." "Come on, Danny." When the man tried to grab Danny's arm, the boy screamed.
"No."
"Leave me alone." That was all Ethan and Dawson needed to act. Dawson restrained the man while Ethan pulled Danny to safety. "It's okay, Danny. You're safe now," Ethan reassured the boy, who was sobbing uncontrollably. After detaining the man and taking him into custody, the story began to unfold. Danny, only 14, had been coerced by the man to transport drugs in the backpack. He had been too scared to tell the truth, but Ethan and Dawson's intervention saved him from a situation that could have had dire consequences. Later, back at the station, as they filled out their report, Dawson looked at Ethan with a nod of approval. "You were right, and you handled it in a way not many would have." "I just did what felt right," Ethan replied, though he couldn't hide a quiet sense of pride. That night, Ethan shared the story with Emily. She listened closely, holding her son's hand when he finished. "You've got your father's heart, Ethan. Always thinking about how you can help people." "I hope so, Mom," he said, glancing at his father's photo on the shelf. "Because there's still so much I want to do." As he got ready for bed, Ethan reflected on the day. He knew the job would be full of moments like this. Quick decisions, tense situations, and people in need, even if they didn't say it out loud. But in that moment, he was more certain than ever that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The job at the police department continued to challenge Ethan in ways he never imagined. Each day brought a new lesson, and the constant pressure pushed him to grow quickly. Still, he was grateful to have Dawson as both a partner and mentor. "Parker, the first rule you need to learn is that you can't save everyone," Dawson said one night while cleaning the patrol car after shift. "If you try to carry the weight of the world, it'll crush you." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He knew Dawson was right, but he also knew his desire to help extended far beyond what he could control. A call came in early one afternoon, sending Ethan and Dawson to a residential neighborhood where a young man had been seen with a firearm. When they arrived, they found a teenager leaning against a wall, the weapon visible at his waist. He seemed agitated, glancing around nervously as if expecting something. "Parker, be careful. These kids can be more unpredictable than seasoned criminals," Dawson murmured as they stepped out of the car. Ethan nodded, maintaining a calm demeanor as he approached.
"Hey, kid."
"Everything okay?" he asked, trying to start a friendly conversation. The teenager looked at them for a moment, but didn't respond. His hands trembled, and Ethan could see he wasn't comfortable with the weapon. "We're not here to hurt you. We just want to talk," Ethan continued, while Dawson kept a hand near his holster, ready to act if necessary. "There's nothing to talk about," the boy said, his voice shaking. I just want to be left alone." "I understand," Ethan said, taking a small step forward. "But carrying a gun like that isn't going to solve your problems. Why don't you tell me what's going on?" The boy hesitated, but before he could answer, a woman ran out of a nearby house, shouting, "Don't shoot. He's my son. Please, he's just scared." The distraction was enough for the boy to try and run, but Dawson moved quickly, blocking his escape while Ethan carefully removed the weapon. "It's all right now," Ethan told the boy, holding him firmly as he broke down in tears. The boy's mother explained that her son had been threatened by a local gang who had forced him to carry the weapon to intimidate others. He didn't want to get involved, but was too scared to refuse. As they took the boy to the station to give a statement, Dawson looked at Ethan. "Good work today, rookie. You stayed calm and stopped this from escalating." Ethan nodded, but he felt a heaviness in his chest. He knew the boy was in a tough situation, and even though they had done their best, he couldn't shake the feeling that it might not be enough to protect him in the future. That night, Emily noticed Ethan's distant look as they ate dinner. "What happened today?" she asked, placing a hand on his arm. "A kid," Ethan sighed.
"He was so scared, Mom."
He didn't want to hurt anyone, but he seemed trapped in something he couldn't control. Emily listened silently, waiting for him to continue. "I know I did what I could, but it doesn't feel like enough. Like there's more I should have done." "Ethan, you can't carry the weight of everything on your own," Emily said softly. "You helped that boy today. Maybe he'll never forget what you did for him. But you have to accept that sometimes the impact of what you do goes beyond what you can see." Ethan nodded, trying to take in his mother's words. He knew she was right, but the sense of helplessness still lingered. Before going to bed, he picked up his father's badge and held it for a moment, as he always did in moments of doubt. "I hope I'm doing this right, Dad." The days that followed were quieter, but Ethan kept reflecting on the boy's situation. He found himself thinking about the choices the young man faced and how every decision had the power to change a life forever. He knew he couldn't control everything, but he realized he still had much to learn about handling the weight of the job. One sunny morning, Dawson suggested a quick coffee stop during their patrol. While waiting in line at a small local cafe, Dawson decided to strike up a conversation. "You've been pretty thoughtful lately, Parker. Everything all right?" "I'm fine. Just been thinking about that kid from the other day," Ethan admitted, staring out the window. "It feels like all we did was temporary." Dawson chuckled dryly, shaking his head. "Welcome to the job, rookie. A lot of what we do feels temporary. But sometimes those temporary things are exactly what people need to change." Ethan stayed quiet, processing his partner's words. He was beginning to understand that the impact of his work wouldn't always be immediately visible, but that didn't make it any less important. Later that day, as they drove through the city, Dawson pulled over in front of a park. "Let's stretch our legs for a minute," he said, stepping out of the car. Ethan followed, walking with Dawson along a shaded path. "You ever wonder why you became a cop?" Dawson asked unexpectedly. Ethan looked at him, surprised by the question. "I always knew I wanted to follow in my dad's footsteps. He was my inspiration." "That's admirable," Dawson said with a nod. "But being a cop isn't just about following someone else's path. It's about figuring out why you're doing it. What's your reason?" "I think my reason is to help people. To make a difference," Ethan replied earnestly. Dawson stopped and looked at him thoughtfully. "Then never lose that. A lot of cops lose sight of why they started. When the weight gets to be too much, remember what brought you here." Ethan stayed silent, taking in his partner's words. He knew Dawson spoke with the wisdom of years on the force, and he was determined to hold on to that lesson. Later that evening, during shift change, Ethan found a letter on his desk. Curious, he opened it and immediately recognized the sender. Danny, the boy they had helped days earlier. "Officer Parker, I just wanted to say, thank you. You listened to me when no one else seemed to care. I know I still have a lot to work out, but you gave me the courage to try. I'll never forget what you did for me."
Danny.
Ethan felt a lump in his throat as he read the words. He showed the letter to Dawson, who smiled proudly. "See, Parker? That's what I was talking about. You might think it's temporary, but for him, it changed everything." Ethan tucked the letter into his uniform pocket, feeling a mix of pride and responsibility. He knew each day would bring new challenges, but in that moment, he felt like he was on the right path. That night at home, Ethan showed the letter to Emily. She read it carefully, her face lighting up with an emotional smile. "This means a lot, Ethan. Not just to him, but to you too." Ethan nodded, glancing at the letter once more before placing it in a drawer next to his father's notebook. "It does. I think I finally understand why I'm here." At the station, things started to change for Ethan. He was no longer just seen as the rookie or Parker's kid. His colleagues began to recognize his skills and the composure he displayed, even under high-pressure situations. Dawson, ever observant, didn't miss the shift. "See that, Parker?" Dawson said as they organized reports. "You're earning the team's respect. It's not just your dad's name, it's you. Does that mean I can stop making coffee for the team?" Ethan joked, drawing a laugh from Dawson. "Not so fast. Respect is one thing, but coffee's another." One afternoon, as they were wrapping up patrol in a residential area, Dawson received a text on the squad car's radio and frowned. "Parker, change of plans. We're stopping by the training field before ending our shift." "The training field?
Why?" "Surprise."
"Just trust me," Dawson replied with a cryptic smile. When they arrived, Ethan noticed something unusual. Several cars were parked, and he could hear distant conversations and laughter. As they got out of the car and walked toward the central courtyard, Ethan recognized many officers who usually worked different shifts. "What's going on here?" Ethan asked, confused. Dawson motioned for him to wait. In the center of the courtyard, Captain Richards stood alongside a few veterans from the precinct. Raising a hand to gather everyone's attention, Richards called out, "Parker." He gestured for Ethan to step forward. "Come here." Ethan walked to the center, feeling everyone's eyes on him. When he stopped beside the captain, Richards began to speak. "Officers, as you know, our job is never easy. Every day, We face challenges, and sometimes we need to be reminded of why we're here. Today, we want to recognize someone who, despite being early in his career, has already demonstrated a commitment that inspires us all. Ethan felt a lump in his throat as Richards continued. Parker, you're showing all of us what it means to have courage and compassion. And as a way to honor not just what you've done, but also your father's legacy, we want to give you something special. Richards nodded toward Dawson, who approached holding a small wooden box. He handed it to Ethan, who opened it carefully. Inside was a special badge engraved with Thomas Parker's name. This badge belonged to your father, Richards said. He received it as a recognition of his bravery. And today, we're passing it to you, so you'll always remember who you are and where you came from. Ethan was speechless. He held the badge delicately, overwhelmed with emotion. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with feeling. I don't know what to say. Richards placed a hand on his shoulder. Just keep doing what you're doing, Parker. That's all we ask. That evening, Ethan arrived home and showed the badge to Emily. She held it gently, tears in her eyes. It's like he's here with you, Ethan. I feel that too, Mom, he said, placing the badge beside his father's on the shelf. And I promise I'll keep honoring it. As he looked at the two badges side by side, Ethan knew he was on a journey bigger than himself. He wasn't just following in his father's footsteps, but forging his own legacy built on courage, compassion, and determination. The days passed, and the pace at the precinct grew more intense. Ethan became increasingly comfortable in his role, though he understood the job's unpredictability. Every shift brought something new, and often something challenging. On a rainy morning, Ethan and Dawson were patrolling a commercial area when the squad car radio crackled with an urgent call, a pursuit of a vehicle linked to an armed robbery. Without hesitation, Dawson flipped on the sirens, heading toward the reported route. Get ready, Parker. Chases are never straightforward, Dawson said, accelerating down the main avenue. Understood, Ethan replied, adjusting his belt and checking his weapon. When they spotted the suspect's car, adrenaline surged. The driver, noticing the squad car, sped up, weaving through traffic to escape. The chase wound through narrow, busy streets as Dawson skillfully kept the vehicle in sight. See that? They're throwing something out the window, Ethan observed, watching small bags hit the pavement. Drugs, most likely. They're ditching evidence. We'll get them all, Dawson replied, focused on the pursuit. Eventually, the car turned into a dead-end alley. With no way out, the occupants, 3 armed men, exited the vehicle and fled on foot. Parker, take the 2 on the left. I'll go after the other one, Dawson shouted, jumping out of the car. Ethan sprinted after the suspects, the rain adding chaos to the scene. He caught up to one in a side street, tackling him with precision. The second suspect hesitated, drawing a weapon, but Ethan reacted quickly, aiming his own gun. Drop the weapon now, he commanded, his voice steady. The man hesitated, visibly nervous. For a moment, it seemed he might comply, but his expression shifted, and he raised the gun toward Ethan. Left with no choice, Ethan pulled the trigger. The shot echoed down the street. The suspect collapsed, wounded in the leg, dropping his weapon immediately. Ethan rushed to secure him, calling for backup over the radio. You're okay. Just stay calm, Ethan said, his own breath shaky as he restrained the injured man. When Dawson arrived, his face was a mix of relief and concern. You good, Parker?
Yeah.
It's under control, Ethan replied, trying to process what had just happened. Back at the station, Ethan was tasked with completing the incident report while the suspects were booked. Dawson stayed nearby, keeping a close eye on him. That wasn't easy, was it? Dawson asked as Ethan wrote. No, Ethan admitted, setting his pen down. I knew it could happen, but I didn't think it'd be so soon. Dawson nodded, sitting beside him. It's always like this, rookie. The first shot is the hardest, but you did what you had to do. You saved your life and others. That's what matters. Ethan looked at Dawson, trying to absorb his words. He knew his partner was right, but the weight of the decision still lingered. That night, Ethan got home later than usual. Emily was waiting for him, as always, but she could tell right away that something was wrong. "What happened today?" she asked, placing a cup of tea in front of him. Ethan explained the incident in detail, trying to keep his voice steady, but his emotions began to surface. "I knew this day would come, but it's different when it actually happens." Emily sat beside him, holding his hand. "Ethan, you did what you needed to do to protect yourself and others. Your father went through this too, and I know he'd be proud of how you handled it." "I hope so," he said, glancing at his father's badge on the shelf. "I just want to keep doing what's right." The next morning, as Ethan walked into the station, Dawson greeted him with a slight smile. "Ready for another day?" Ethan took a deep breath and nodded. "Always." Dawson gave him a friendly pat on the shoulder.
Good.
Because the world out there doesn't wait. Ethan knew the job would remain challenging, but he also knew he was growing every day. He wasn't just becoming a good officer. He was becoming the kind of man his father would have been proud to call his son. After the chase incident, Ethan felt something inside him had shifted. It wasn't just the pressures of the job, but the weight of the decisions he now had to make. He understood that every choice in the field was another line in the book of his career, and some lines were harder to write than others. In the days that followed, Ethan stayed focused on his duties. Dawson, always observant, noticed his partner was more introspective, but chose to give him space. "Parker, remember, what happened is part of the job. It doesn't define you. And if you ever need to talk, you know where to find me," he said casually while reviewing reports. "Thanks, Dawson." "I'm okay," Ethan replied, still processing everything. One day, while sorting through files at the station, Ethan came across a folder with his father's name on it. He hesitated, feeling a knot in his chest, but eventually opened it. Inside were reports from operations Thomas had been part of, including notes on the mission that had ended in his death. Ethan read the words carefully, trying to imagine how his father must have felt that night. The descriptions in the report were precise, but devoid of emotion. They didn't reveal what Thomas had felt, only what he had done. As Ethan held the report, Dawson walked into the room and noticed what he was reading. "That's about your dad, isn't it?" "Yeah," Ethan replied, still staring at the papers. "It's strange seeing it all laid out so coldly." Dawson pulled up a chair and sat next to him. "Reports don't tell the whole story. I was there that night, Parker. I know what he did." Ethan looked up at Dawson, surprised. "You were with him?" Dawson nodded, crossing his arms. "Thomas was my partner before you. And let me tell you something. He wasn't just a great cop. He was a great man. That day, he saved lives, including mine." Dawson's words hit Ethan deeply. He had always known his father was a hero, but hearing it directly from someone who had been there gave that truth new weight. "He never hesitated, did he?" Ethan asked, his voice heavy with emotion. "Never," Dawson replied. "But not because he wasn't scared.
He was.
What he had was the courage to do what needed to be done, even when he was afraid." That night, Ethan shared the conversation with Emily. His mother, though emotional, seemed unsurprised by what Dawson had said. "Your father always spoke about Dawson," she said. "He said he was like a brother to him. I'm glad he's with you now." "Me too," Ethan replied, glancing at his father's badge on the shelf. "You know, Mom, sometimes I wonder if I'm strong enough to do what he did." Emily placed a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. "Ethan, you don't have to be exactly like him. You just have to be yourself. What matters is what you do with what he taught you." Her words stayed with Ethan that night. He knew he still had a lot to learn, but he also felt like he was starting to understand the true meaning of the legacy his father had left behind. Ethan began the day as usual, putting on his uniform, adjusting his belt, and staring at his father's badge on the shelf before heading out. The conversation with Dawson about Thomas still echoed in his mind, but he knew he had to stay focused. The job was relentless, and every day brought something new. Dawson, as always, was waiting in the squad car, ready for another day of saving the world. "Parker?" Ethan smiled as he got in. "Let's see what the world has for us today." That afternoon, they were called to an incident at a local school. A teenager had been found with drugs in his locker, and the administrators had requested police presence. When Ethan and Dawson arrived, They found a young boy sitting in the hallway, his head down, avoiding eye contact with everyone. "This is Jack," the principal said, approaching the officers. "We found illegal substances in his locker during a random inspection." Dawson glanced at Ethan and gestured for him to take the lead. Ethan nodded and stepped toward the boy. "Jack, can we talk?" Ethan asked calmly. The boy looked up, startled, but didn't respond. "Look, I know this seems scary, but I want to understand what's going on. Can you tell me your side of the story?" Ethan continued, crouching to meet him at eye level. After a few moments of silence, Jack finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "They're not mine." "Okay. So, how did they end up in your lockers?" Ethan asked, trying to make the conversation less intimidating. Jack hesitated, but eventually began to explain. He told them that a group of older students had forced him to store the drugs for them, threatening to hurt him if he said anything. Ethan exchanged a glance with Dawson, who gave a small nod of understanding. "Jack, thank you for trusting me. I know this isn't easy. We'll figure this out together, but I need you to help me." As they drove Jack to the station for a statement, Dawson broke the silence. "You've got away with these situations, Parker. Not everyone has the patience to listen." "I guess I see a bit of myself in these kids," Ethan replied, staring out the window. "Sometimes all someone needs is a chance." Dawson smiled. "Keep this up, Parker, and you're going to leave a bigger impact than you realize." At the station, Jack was connected with his family and given the support needed to ensure his safety. Before leaving, the boy looked at Ethan and said, "Thank you for believing in me." Ethan nodded, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. Every small act mattered, and he knew he was doing his part to build something positive. Back in the squad car, Dawson glanced at Ethan with a tired smile. "You know we can't save everyone, right?" "I know, but if we can save them one at a time, it's worth it." Dawson chuckled and started the engine. "You've got a lot to learn in this job, Parker. And I've got a feeling I'll be proud to say I was your partner." Ethan looked at Dawson, sensing the sincerity in his words. He knew the job was only the beginning of something bigger, and he was ready to face every challenge ahead, knowing he was leaving his mark on the world. The day started quietly, but Ethan knew that never lasted. He and Dawson were in the squad car, driving through calm streets and taking advantage of the downtime to chat about everything from old cases to the best places to eat in town. "You think you'll get used to this routine?" Dawson asked with a grin. "I think so. Every day's different, and I like that. But the uncertainty still gets to me sometimes," Ethan replied, looking out the window. Dawson nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, uncertainty keeps us sharp. But it's also what weighs on you after a while." Their conversation was interrupted by the crackle of the radio. An urgent voice announced, "All units, immediate backup needed in Sector 5. Hostage situation at a bank. Armed suspects confirmed on site." Dawson's expression turned serious in an instant as he looked at Ethan. "This is it, Parker. Let's go." Ethan nodded, tightening his seatbelt as Dawson switched on the sirens and sped toward the scene. When they arrived, the situation was tense. Police vehicles blocked off the streets around the bank, and officers were positioned strategically. Captain Richards was on site, coordinating the operation. "Dawson, Parker, glad you're here," Richards said, spotting them. "We've got 4 armed suspects and at least 10 hostages inside. We're trying to establish communication, but they're not cooperating." "What's the plan, Captain?" Dawson asked, getting straight to the point. "We're assembling an entry team, but we need to buy time. Parker, I want you to handle communication with the suspects. A new voice might get through to them." Ethan felt the weight of the responsibility, but didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir." Minutes later, Ethan was behind cover, radio in hand. He adjusted his tone, aiming to sound calm but firm. "This is Officer Parker. I'm speaking to the leader of the group. Can you hear me?" There was a brief silence before a gruff voice responded. "What do you want?" "I want to help resolve this without anyone getting hurt. Tell me what you need." "We don't want to talk. We just want a way out. Clear the exit and let us go," the voice snapped, tense and defensive. Ethan took a deep breath, keeping his composure. "Listen, I know you're under pressure, but if you try to leave like this, things will only get worse. Let's work together to find a solution. The silence on the other end was heavy. Ethan used the moment to continue. Think about the hostages in there. They've got families waiting for them. Nobody wants this to end badly. After a pause, the leader's voice returned, quieter but still guarded. I'll think about it. Dawson, crouched beside Ethan, whispered, Good job. You're starting to break through. Time dragged as they waited for a response. Ethan knew every second was critical, and the hostages' lives depended on every word he said. Finally, the radio crackled again. We'll release 2 hostages, but only if you pull back. Ethan looked to Richards, who gave a nod of approval. Speaking into the radio, he replied, Understood. We'll pull back. Release the hostages, and we'll keep talking. Moments later, 2 hostages ran out of the bank, heading to the safety of the officers. Ethan felt a wave of relief, but knew the situation was far from over. The operation stretched on for hours, with Ethan maintaining communication and the tactical team preparing for action if needed. After tense negotiations, the suspects agreed to surrender one by one, releasing the remaining hostages in the process. When it was over, Ethan felt the adrenaline slowly ebb away. Dawson placed a hand on his shoulder, smiling. You handled that like a pro, Parker. That's not easy, and you pulled it off without losing your cool. Thanks, Dawson. But I think I'll need a strong cup of coffee after this. Dawson laughed as Richards approached. Great work today, Parker. You kept your composure and helped prevent a tragic outcome. Keep this up, and you'll go far. Ethan nodded, feeling a mix of relief and accomplishment. He knew this was just one of many challenges he'd face, but in that moment, he felt more prepared than ever. As the day wound down, Ethan welcomed the quiet moment to process everything that had happened. The successful operation at the bank was behind them, but the weight of responsibility still lingered. Every decision carried consequences, and he reflected deeply on that. Back at the station, while finishing the report, Dawson sat down beside him with 2 cups of coffee.
Here.
Figured you needed this more than I do. Ethan accepted it with a small smile. Thanks. Today was intense. It was.
But you handled it well.
And before you start second-guessing what you could have done differently, just remember this. Everyone made it out alive, Parker. That's the goal. Ethan nodded, but his mind was still caught on the critical moments of the operation. It's strange. I keep wondering what the hostages were thinking. Were they scared? Did they believe we'd save them, or fail? Dawson looked at him for a moment before responding. You know what they were thinking, Parker? That they needed help. And you gave it to them. That's what matters. Ethan knew Dawson was right, but the questions continued to echo in his mind. He finished the report in silence, holding on to his partner's words as an anchor amid his swirling emotions. That night at home, Emily was waiting for Ethan with a cup of tea, as she always did on his tough days. Do you want to tell me about it? She asked, her voice calm and comforting. Ethan sighed, sitting on the couch next to her. It was tense. Hostages, negotiations, so much at stake. I think we did everything right, but it's hard not to think about what could have gone wrong. Emily placed her hand over his. Ethan, that's just who you are. You care, and that's a good thing. But you also have to remember that you're doing your best. That's all anyone can ask of you. Ethan smiled faintly, feeling comforted by her words. Thanks, Mom. Sometimes I think I overthink things. It's part of the job. But you're not alone. He glanced at the shelf where his father's badge and emblem were displayed prominently. Holding his gaze there for a moment, he murmured, I hope he'd be proud. Emily squeezed his hand firmly. There's no doubt about it, Ethan. He would be. The next day, when Ethan arrived at the station, he was greeted with a surprise. His colleagues, including Captain Richards, had gathered to commend him for the operation the day before. Parker, you showed leadership and composure yesterday, Richards said. That's something not everyone can do. We're proud of you. Dawson, standing beside him, smiled and clapped him on the shoulder. Looks like you're climbing the ranks, rookie. Ethan tried to hide his embarrassment, but felt a wave of satisfaction. Thanks, everyone. But it was a team effort. I didn't do it alone. Richards nodded. Humility is good, Parker. but own what you did. It was important. Ethan knew he still had a lot to learn, but those words of recognition meant more than he could express. In the squad car during patrol, Dawson broke the silence. You know, Parker, I've worked with a lot of rookies over the years. Some good, some not so much.
But
You've got something special. Are you just saying that because I survived my first big test? Ethan joked.
No.
I'm saying it because I see in you what I saw in your father. Not just courage, but the willingness to do what's right, even when it's hard. Dawson's words stayed with Ethan for the rest of the day. He knew he was on the right path, but he also knew the work had just begun. As he looked out the squad car window, Ethan felt that every challenge, every moment of doubt, was shaping not just his career, but the man he wanted to become. After being recognized for the bank operation, Ethan felt he had found his place in the department. His colleagues treated him with more respect, and Dawson continued to guide him through the toughest situations. One morning, during patrol, Dawson received a text while Ethan was driving. His expression shifted into something Ethan couldn't quite read. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked, keeping his eyes on the road. "Not exactly, but I've got a surprise for you. After lunch, we're stopping by the community center." Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "A surprise? Since when do you keep secrets?" Dawson just chuckled and leaned back in his seat. "Trust me, Parker. You're going to like this." After lunch, they arrived at the community center, a modest but well-kept place where kids and teens participated in educational and recreational activities. As soon as they walked in, Ethan was met with the hum of laughter and voices. "What are we doing here?" he asked, glancing around. Dawson pointed across the room to a familiar face. Danny, the boy Ethan had helped weeks earlier. Danny noticed Ethan and quickly stood up, looking both nervous and excited. "Officer Parker." "Danny, what are you doing here?" Ethan asked, surprised, as he shook the boy's hand. "After what happened, my mom got me into a program here. They help kids who've been through tough stuff. It's been good for me," Danny said with a shy smile. Dawson gave Ethan a pat on the shoulder. "I thought you'd want to know. Looks like what you did really made a difference." Ethan looked at Danny, feeling a wave of pride. He knew police work was often about addressing immediate problems, but seeing a lasting impact like this was rare and precious. "I'm happy for you, Danny. And if you ever need anything, you can count on me, okay?" Ethan said, "Okay. Thanks, officer." "Really?" Danny replied before heading back to the activities. Back in the squad car, Ethan was thoughtful. Dawson, noticing the silence, spoke first. "See, Parker? This is what I was talking about. You won't always know the impact you've made, but when you do, it makes it all worth it." "I don't think I ever imagined the job could be like this," Ethan admitted. Dawson smiled. "And this is just the beginning." Later at the station, Ethan was met with another surprise. Captain Richards called him into his office. When Ethan entered, Richards was holding an envelope. "Parker, you haven't been here long, but you've already shown a level of maturity that few rookies have. That's why I want to offer you an opportunity." Ethan listened closely, eager for what was coming next. "There's an opening in the State Academy's Advanced Training Program. It's an intensive course for officers who want to specialize in crisis negotiations. I think it'd be perfect for you." Ethan was taken aback. He knew few officers were nominated for the program, and being among them was a great honor.
Thank you, sir.
"That means a lot to me. Think about it, Parker. It's not mandatory, but I believe it could be a big step in your career," Richard said, handing him the envelope. Ethan left the office with the envelope in hand, feeling the weight of the decision ahead of him. That evening at home, Ethan told his mother about the opportunity. Emily listened carefully, but could sense his hesitation. "Are you unsure about this?" she asked while preparing dinner. "A little. I don't want it to seem like I'm leaving my team behind or stepping away from what I do now," Ethan replied, glancing at the envelope on the table. Emily smiled and sat beside him. "Ethan, growing doesn't mean abandoning what you have. It means preparing yourself to do even more." Her words stayed with Ethan as he looked at the envelope again. He knew the decision was significant and that, no matter what, his journey as an officer would continue to lead him to new challenges. Ethan spent the week reflecting on the proposal to join the advanced training program. The idea of specializing in crisis negotiations was exciting, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving something behind. Dawson, always observant, noticed Ethan's thoughtful demeanor during their patrols. "Parker, let me guess what's going on. You haven't decided about the program yet, have you?" "Not yet," Ethan admitted with a faint smile. "I just don't want it to feel like I'm abandoning the team." Dawson laughed, shaking his head. "Abandoning the team? Parker, you're out of your mind. The only thing that'll happen is you'll come back even better. No one here is going to fault you for wanting to grow. What if I'm not ready?" Ethan asked, his voice carrying a hint of frustration. Dawson looked at him for a moment before replying. "No one's ever 100% ready for the next step, Parker. You only find out once you take it." That afternoon, as Ethan was organizing reports at the station, Danny and his mother walked in. They carried a small box and looked nervous but happy. "Officer Parker," Danny called out excitedly when he saw him. "Danny, what brings you here?" Ethan asked, surprised. Danny's mother spoke first. "We wanted to thank you again for everything you did for Danny. He's talked so much about how you inspired him, and we wanted to give you something as a token of our appreciation." She handed Ethan the small box. When he opened it, he found a symbolic community hero badge engraved with the words, "The one who inspires hope." I don't know what to say," Ethan murmured, feeling the emotional weight of the gesture. "Just promise to keep helping people the way you helped me," Danny said with a smile. Ethan held the badge for a moment before tucking it into his pocket.
Thank you, Danny.
"I'll do my best." Later, at the station, while staring at the badge, Ethan made his decision. He walked to Captain Richards' office and knocked on the door. "Come in," Richards said, looking up from his desk. "Have you decided, Parker?" "Yes, sir. I want to join the advanced training program." Richards smiled and nodded. "Good choice, Parker. It'll be challenging, but you've got what it takes." In the weeks that followed, Ethan began preparing for the course. He reviewed communication theories and conflict resolution strategies while continuing to work alongside Dawson. Their partnership grew even stronger, and Dawson never missed a chance to encourage him. "I'm going to miss you here, but I know you're going to crush it. And when you're back, I expect you to teach me some of those fancy techniques," Dawson joked during a patrol. "Deal," Ethan replied with a grin. On the day Ethan left for the academy, the station gathered to wish him luck. Dawson was the last to speak, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Remember who you are, Parker. Your dad would be so proud." "We all are." Ethan took a deep breath, overwhelmed with emotion. "Thanks, everyone. I promise to come back even better." As he climbed into the car headed to the State Academy, Ethan looked out the window at his colleagues waving goodbye. He knew he was leaving behind an important chapter of his life, but also stepping into something even greater. At the State Academy, Ethan was met with an intense and competitive atmosphere. The instructors were demanding, and the officers in the program came from departments across the state, each bringing unique experiences and stories. On the very first day, Ethan was thrown into a complex hostage negotiation simulation. The tension was palpable, but he remained calm, applying what he had already learned in the field and absorbing the lessons the instructors provided. After the exercise, one of the instructors, Lieutenant Harris, approached him. "You've got a knack for this, Parker. It's clear you know how to connect with people." "Thank you, sir." "I still have a lot to learn," Ethan replied humbly. "And that's exactly why you're going to excel here. Keep it up." In the weeks that followed, Ethan threw himself into the training with complete dedication. He knew he was far from home, but he also knew that each challenge he faced there would make him a better officer, more prepared for the real-world crises ahead. At night, in the dormitory, he often looked at the community hero badge Danny had given him and the emblem of his father, which he had brought along. Both were reminders of who he was and why he was there. One day at a time, he murmured to himself, determined. The days at the State Academy were grueling. Ethan quickly realized that the advanced training program was more demanding than he had expected, requiring not only technical skill but also emotional resilience. Mornings were spent in lectures on crisis psychology and human behavior, while afternoons were filled with complex simulations of hostage situations, barricades, and high-stakes negotiations. Among the instructors, Lieutenant Harris became a mentor to Ethan. Harris, with decades of crisis negotiation experience, was known for his practical and straightforward approach. Remember this, Parker. In a negotiation, the most important thing is to buy time. Time is the only tool we have to de-escalate and find a solution. Ethan absorbed every word, applying Harris's teachings in each exercise. Still, he recognized that despite his determination, there was much more to learn. One particularly tough afternoon, the recruits participated in a real-time negotiation simulation. The tension in the room was high, and Ethan could feel the weight of every decision bearing down on him. The situation involved an armed suspect who had taken 2 people hostage in a store. Ethan was chosen to lead the negotiation, and the pressure was palpable. "Time to show what you've learned, Parker," said Harris, monitoring the recruit's performance. Ethan picked up the radio and started talking to the mock suspect. "This is Officer Parker. I'm here to help. What do you need right now?" On the other end, the suspect responded angrily, mimicking the tension of a real-life situation. "I don't want to talk to you. I want all of you out of here now." Ethan remained calm, recalling Harris's advice. "I understand you're frustrated. I want to understand your situation, but we need to talk first." The exercise went on for over an hour, testing Ethan's patience and his ability to stay composed. Though he successfully resolved the simulation without any casualties, Harris pointed out something critical. "Good job, Parker, but here's what you need to work on. You're trying to take control too soon. Let the suspect talk more. They need to feel in charge before you can guide the situation." Ethan nodded, absorbing the feedback. He knew every mistake was an opportunity to grow, and he was determined to improve. In the following weeks, Ethan excelled in other simulations, applying Harris's lessons and honing his ability to read the emotions and motivations of the suspects. But the ultimate challenge came during the final exercise, a high-stakes scenario designed to be as realistic and unpredictable as possible. On the morning of the test, Harris gathered the recruits to explain the scenario. "You'll be dealing with an evolving crisis. I won't tell you how it starts or ends. You'll need to adapt." Ethan was assigned as the leader of the negotiation team. As he stepped into the simulated setting, a commercial building with multiple hostages and armed suspects, he felt the weight of responsibility. The exercise began with a call from a suspect demanding money and transportation to escape. Ethan kept his composure, following the strategies he had learned. "I understand you want to get out of this safely. Why don't you tell me what we can do to help?" While working to gain the suspect's trust, complications arose. A hostage was released and reported that there was another suspect in a separate room. Ethan had to coordinate his team while continuing the conversation with the first suspect. "Parker, time's running out. What do we do?" one of the recruits asked, visibly nervous. Ethan took a deep breath and gave clear instructions, splitting the team to monitor the second suspect while he stayed focused on the first. After 2 hours of intense negotiations and rapid decision-making, the exercise ended successfully. All the hostages were rescued, and the suspects surrendered. In the debriefing room, Harris addressed the team with his feedback. "Good work, Parker. You showed leadership and stayed calm under pressure. More importantly, you trusted your team. That's what makes a great negotiator." Ethan felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He knew there was still much to learn, but this moment confirmed he was on the right path. That evening, Ethan called Emily to share the experience. "It was tough, but I think we did a good job." "I'm sure you did, Ethan. Your father would be so proud of you," she said, her voice filled with emotion. Ethan smiled, glancing at his father's badge on the bedside table. He knew every step he took was a way to honor Thomas's legacy while carving out his own path. "Thanks, Mom. I'll keep doing my best." The advanced training program came to an end, and Ethan felt like a changed officer. The intensive weeks had shaped him, teaching not only negotiation techniques, but also the emotional discipline needed for situations that could spiral out of control. On graduation day, Lieutenant Harris delivered an inspiring speech. You've all faced weeks of challenges and growth. But remember, what makes you great negotiators isn't just what you've learned here. It's the courage to apply it in the real world. When Ethan walked up to the stage to receive his certificate, he felt the weight of his father's badge in his pocket. That moment was not just a personal achievement, but also a tribute to Thomas's legacy. After the ceremony, Harris pulled him aside for a private conversation. "Parker, I want you to know you have a rare talent. It's not just about technique. It's about how you connect with people. I have no doubt you're going to make a difference." "Thank you, sir," Ethan replied humbly. "And if you ever need guidance, you know where to find me." Back in his hometown, Ethan was welcomed enthusiastically by the precinct. Dawson was waiting at the entrance with a wide grin and a coffee in hand. "Welcome back, elite negotiator," Dawson joked, handing him the coffee. "Thanks, Dawson. It's good to be home," Ethan replied, feeling at ease. Captain Richards organized a small gathering to celebrate Ethan's return and highlighted the importance of his new training for the team. "Parker, you're not just an officer anymore. You're someone we'll count on in the toughest situations. We know you're ready for this." The following week, Ethan returned to patrols with Dawson but soon had a chance to put his training to use in a real-life situation. A dispute at a local market escalated when a customer threatened the manager with a knife. As the team surrounded the building, Richards entrusted Ethan with the role of negotiator. He positioned himself outside the market, picked up the megaphone, and began speaking. "My name is Ethan Parker. I'm here to help. I know you're upset, but I want to understand what's going on." The man inside shouted back, demanding the police back off. Ethan remained unfazed, recalling Harris's lessons and focusing on building trust. "Listen, no one wants this to end badly. Why don't you tell me what's bothering you?" The conversation lasted about 20 minutes before the man began to open up, sharing his struggles with debt, work pressure, and feeling unheard. Ethan seized the opportunity to reinforce his empathy. "I understand you're feeling overwhelmed. We've all felt that way at some point. But what you're doing right now isn't the only way out. Let's find a solution together." Finally, the man dropped the knife and walked out of the store with his hands up. The team detained him without resistance, and no one was hurt. Back at the station, Richards called Ethan into his office. "Parker, you did an outstanding job today. This is exactly what we hoped for from you after your training."
Thank you, sir.
"I was just doing my job. And you did it very well," Richards said with a slight smile. Dawson, of course, couldn't resist chiming in.
See, Parker?
"You're getting so good, you might end up taking my spot." "Never, Dawson. You're irreplaceable," Ethan replied, laughing. That evening at home, Ethan shared the incident with Emily. She listened attentively, a proud smile on her face. "I'm so happy for you, Ethan. Every day, you're getting closer to achieving everything you've always wanted." Ethan glanced at his father's badge and emblem on the shelf. He knew the journey wasn't over yet, but he felt closer than ever to honoring Thomas's legacy.
Thanks, Mom.
"There's still a lot to do, but I'm ready for whatever comes next." Months passed since Ethan returned from advanced training, and his reputation in the department continued to grow. He had become a go-to officer in crisis situations, and his colleagues knew they could count on him when challenges arose. But on a bright spring day, Ethan would face the greatest test of his career. The call came in the morning, a hostage situation at a local school. An armed man had entered the building and locked a group of students and teachers inside a classroom. Panic spread through the community, and the department was mobilized immediately. Ethan and Dawson were the first to arrive on the scene, followed by several other patrol cars. Captain Richards quickly took control of the operation but looked straight at Ethan. "Parker, this one's yours. He's armed, and we've got at least 15 people in there. We can't afford any mistakes." Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the responsibility, but also the trust Richards and the team had in him. "I'm ready, sir." Ethan stepped into the role of negotiator while Dawson and other officers secured a perimeter around the school. He picked up the megaphone and began speaking in the calm, steady voice he had practiced so many times. "My name is Ethan Parker. I'm here to help. I want to make sure no one gets hurt. Can we talk?" For long minutes, there was no response. The tension was almost unbearable. Then, A voice finally came from inside the building. You think you can control me? I'm not coming out of here without getting what I want. I understand you're frustrated, but I want to hear your side. Tell me what's going on, Ethan said, trying to open a dialogue. The man started to talk, his words filled with anger and desperation. He spoke about financial problems, feeling abandoned, and how no one seemed to care about him. Ethan recognized that beneath the threat was a man crying out for help. I know you're going through a lot, but I want you to think about the students in there. They have nothing to do with this. Why don't you release them while we keep talking? There was a pause, then a hesitant response. I'll let half of them go, but I need guarantees you won't come in here. Understood. We'll keep our word. Release the students, and we'll keep talking, Ethan promised. Moments later, the school door opened, and several students ran out. Seeing them escorted to safety gave Ethan renewed determination. The conversation continued, but the man grew increasingly agitated, threatening the remaining hostages. The tactical team began pressuring Richards to authorize a forced entry. Captain, we're ready to move. One wrong move, and this could end badly, one officer said. Richards looked at Ethan, who was deeply focused on the negotiation. Parker, how much more time do you need? Ethan knew the clock was ticking, but he also understood that a forced entry could result in tragedy. He looked at Richards and spoke with conviction. Give me a few more minutes, sir. We're close to resolving this. Richards nodded, placing his trust in Ethan.
Finally, the pivotal moment arrived.
The man was visibly shaken, but Ethan found an opening. I know you feel like you're alone, but you don't have to do this. You can walk out of here and we'll figure this out together. There was a silence that felt like an eternity. Then, the door opened again. The man walked out with his hands up, followed by the remaining hostages. The tactical team quickly detained him while Ethan moved in to ensure all the hostages were safe. The relief was palpable, and the crowd outside erupted in applause as the students emerged unharmed. Back at the station, Richards called Ethan into his office. Parker, you took a big risk today, but in the end, it was the right call. What you did saved lives.
Thank you, sir.
I just did what I was trained to do. You did more than that. You proved you're ready to lead in any situation. Your father would be incredibly proud of you. Richards' words struck a deep chord with Ethan. He knew there was still so much to learn, but he felt he had honored Thomas's legacy in a way he never imagined. That night, at home, Ethan placed his father's badge next to his own on the shelf. He looked over at Emily, who was sitting beside him, smiling. You honor his name every day, Ethan. I know he's proud of you. Ethan nodded, holding the badge tightly. I just want to keep doing what he would have done, helping people one day at a time. As the night wore on, Ethan gazed at the starry sky, feeling a profound connection to his father's legacy. He knew his journey as an officer was just beginning, but he also knew he was exactly where he was meant to be, making a difference one step at a time. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our upcoming stories. Make sure to hit the notification bell to stay updated with more amazing content. Your support means a lot to us. See you in the next video, which is already on your screen.